Air Canada says flights will continue as normal while its unionized pilots vote on a tentative 4-year contract. The two sides announced this weekend they had reached an agreement preventing a work stoppage that would have grounded Air Canada flights as soon as Wednesday. The airline says customers who change flights originally scheduled between today and September 23rd can change their booking back to their original flight with no cost, providing there is still space available. The union says that the tentative agreement will generate about $1.9 billion of additional value for Air Canada pilots over the course of the agreement. Joining me now to unpack this further is Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, glad to have you back.
Always good to be here, Theresa.
Now,
some dramatic photos there in your preamble.
Very dramatic, but what would have been the impact of the strike on the economy if this had happened?
Well, it's already had an impact. Even the threat of a strike. The third quarter, the calendar quarter in which we're in right now that ends September, is where Canadian airlines in Canada, make their money. It is, and so the strike threat at this moment is where most Canadians do most of the traveling. I don't know whether it's back to school or vacationing, but this is the key travel window. So to have this disruption, we all know people that have changed flights, adjusted flights. This has been very disruptive. If they'd stopped it altogether, I think it would have been even more disruptive, not just for the airline industry, but so much cargo goes through commercial airplanes. Probably would have helped a company like Cargojet because that would be the only other game in town. So I just think there would be a lot of disruption, and also just I don't know. There would be a lot of national discontent. It's not like we have 18 options like the Americans do for how to get from A to B. We have WestJet, you have Air Canada, and if you're flying out of the Toronto Island, you got Porter, and that's pretty much it.
Now, you did just mention at this time, but in general, travel is important in our country. But this disruption would have also caused a major effect on the supply chain. In your opinion, should travel be an essential service?
Well, it depends on what context. It certainly wasn't considered essential service 4 years ago when when it was all coming apart. But well, if your real question is, should travel be subject to being held hostage by unions, who I noted that you'd said the union said it would create $1.9 billion in value for the unions. Well, where do you think the $1.9 billion is going to come from? Yes, to a certain extent, it's coming from Air Canada shareholders. I mean, presumably Air Canada will make some percentage of $1.9 billion less as a result. But it's also going to be coming in the terms of higher fares in what is essentially a duopoly. And if the old world, if Britain and France and Italy and those places are all about history, Canada's about geography. You really can't drive between our major cities, with a possible exception of Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and maybe Edmonton to Calgary. You really do need to fly pretty much anywhere to get anywhere. So yes, travel is an essential service, and I think it's an open question as to whether it should be held hostage to the potential of union-led or lockout disruption.
Now, what does this do for a company's brand when people have to worry about a strike, pay a lot more to make changes, and their business and personal lives are constantly disrupted?
Well, do I need to say more? I think you pretty much covered it. Well, let me just talk about Air Canada as a brand. I mean, I think the airline industry is a terrible, terrible, terrible industry to invest in, because it's just subject to so many of these things, weather and so much else that's beyond one's control. But I think as Canadians, we underestimate the quality of our airlines. WestJet, Air Canada, and Porter is just a gem. Our airlines are actually, in a North American context, way better than the Americans. I enjoy flying our airlines so much more than I do flying other, like the American equivalents. Yes, there are some really high-end airlines out of the Middle East and East Asia that's catering to a different market. But in terms of mass transit, I think the brands are not ranked as highly as they should be.
Now, we do just have under a minute here, but there have been a lot of delays recently. In July, we had Delta offline and many other major airlines offline because of the crowd strike. They lost millions and millions more during the pandemic. How can they win back customer loyalty?
Well, I think certain things Air Canada did, it may have been Machiavellian, but taking control of their own Aeroplan rewards points has been tremendous. I use it far more now that they've done that. How they did it was pretty aggressive, but now that they've done it, I use Air Canada a lot because of that. So I think maximizing on their Air Canada rewards was probably a really great way to ensure loyalty and people continue flying.
Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Theresa.